Welcome to FinanceFeeds podcasts. FinanceFeeds is the world's premier interactive Forex industry news source, providing the latest insights and current affairs from within the online trading industry worldwide. Enjoy our latest podcast episode. This episode is sponsored by Zotapay, your local and global payment solution. Visit zotapay.com and boost your business. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining Finance Feeds podcast. This is episode 11. My name is Nikolai Isayev. I'm editor-in-chief of Finance Feeds. My guest today is Alex Behar, who is Chief Information Officer at Zotapay. Alex, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, Nikolai.
Always a pleasure. Alex, I don't think you and I have actually ever formally met. I know that your position at Zotapay probably requires you to be, deep in the trenches, so to say, with your work. But I wanted to know, do you ever attend any industry conferences or events?
Yes, I do. I do attend, but I'm more on the technical side of things. So I usually sit around in dark rooms with other developers and technology people, and we sort of build technology. But yes, you could find me on the hallways of the Magnet Show or IFX and so on and so forth.
And there's a London Magnet Summit coming up in November. Will we see you there at that show?
No, unfortunately, I'll be in a North American show schedule later this year, so I'm attending Money 2020 later this week. I guess by the time this airs, it would have been after the show.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, best of luck at Money 2020. That should be a great event.
Thank you.
So Zotapay, you guys are obviously a global payments company. So I believe that you guys cater to many different industries. Can you tell us sort of what your recent focus has been globally on, your target markets and how things have progressed or changed over the last year, 2, 3?
So that's a very interesting question. A few things about Zotapay and the market that it operates. A good way to think of Zota is that we are a payments marketplace. So we allow merchants, predominantly Western merchants, European and some North American, to actually access the wide universe of alternative payment methods. The FIS Global Payment Reports that come out every year, actually the most recent one in 2022, noted that outside of the OECD countries, the credit card penetration, and usually the big card duopoly, Visa and Master, but the credit card penetration is under 20%. So there are, as the report notes, there are nearly 3 billion credit cards issued to nearly 1.5 billion unique individuals. So a quick back of the napkin calculation means that if you accept only credit cards, you're limited to about 1.5 billion people, albeit some of the wealthiest nations on earth. But still, there's about 6 billion people out there who transact digitally. And we, as in the West, we tend to call them underbanked or unbanked, but I would beg to differ. They just don't use the same banking instruments like we do, such as Visa, MasterCards, debit, credit cards, and so on and so forth. They use all kinds of alternative payment methods and platforms to settle. And that happens all around the globe. So the focus of Zota effectively is the non-credit card world. Even though we provide credit card acquiring services in many jurisdictions around the world, our bread and butter is the ability to actually go outside of the card system and effectively provide the connectivity to the rest of the 6 billion souls on the planet who consume digital services and goods.
And you just mentioned that, Visa, MasterCard, the big players around the world, their growth in emerging markets is actually quite slow. Why do you think that is? And in terms of your services, what are some of the payment solutions that are outpacing Visa and MasterCard in these emerging markets?
So in the card industry itself, ever since sort of the AmeriCard spin-off from Bank of America in the 50s and the inception of the industry itself, it has been plagued from security issues. It's even to this day, if you have someone's card number and the CVV, the physical card itself, if you can take a photo of it you might be able to process a transaction, which effectively means that there's a sort of a level of risk always associated with the plastic card as a payment instrument of having sensitive data on it. That hasn't
Mm-hmm.
really changed over the last 70 years, pretty much since credit cards and charge cards were around. In part of the adoption issues is I like giving an interesting example of emerging markets, such as, for example, in Indonesia. Those of our listeners currently who've been around this region in the world would know that they have amazing seafood markets and a very long lineage of fishing and amazing seafood species
Mm-hmm.
for consumption. And so, as many visitors do, I also like to go around and look at their markets and go and buy some fish and perhaps
Mm-hmm.
cook it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you go and make a transaction, you go to a fish market and you go to a fisher and you'd like to buy some fish from them. Well, if they had to buy a POS terminal, to purchase a POS terminal and participate in the card network, it is likely that the POS terminal costs more than their fishing boat,
Mm-hmm.
right? On someone who lives on a few $100s a year, it's a major expense. It's a major investment into just participating into the card network itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just on the merchant side. On the client side, there are certain costs associated with having a Visa or a MasterCard in your pocket that effectively they expect to recover that cost associated with it
Sure.
per year. So this is, I think, one of the bigger reasons as to why alternative payment methods ended up sort of winning the popularity context in emerging
Mm-hmm.
markets.
Mm-hmm.
Today, even as a POS terminal is an expensive endeavor, a full functioning Android phone is $25. So it's a phone that has NFC. It can scan and display QR codes, and
Mm-hmm.
the settlement is immediate for these alternative payment methods, direct bank transfers, and peer-to-peer payment methods that exist around the world. So effectively, this provides a security as no card ever could, because both devices are internet connected.
Mm-hmm.
That is a luxury that they did not have back in the 50s, of course.
Mm-hmm.
They're able to without having any sensitive information conduct a transaction. So neither the merchant nor the client actually have any information that can be reused to place further orders. So inherently, the fraud rate and effectively bad transaction rate of APMs is much lower.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's why a lot of merchants and a lot of vendors out there would lean towards APMs once they understand the ecosystem and how reliable and stable it is.
Mm-hmm. And if we take a step back, as far as I understand, that's one of the ways that merchants and customers can transact in emerging markets today, right? As an alternative to the more expensive traditional card payments. But how did the emerging markets, merchants and customers in the emerging markets pay for goods and services, let's say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Because I'm looking at this from a perspective of the online trading industry. And, things like Forex brokers, they've been working in regions of Asia, in North Africa, a lot of these emerging markets for quite some time now. Were these solutions available or have been available for quite some time? Or is it something that we're seeing an evolution of in the last, let's say, 5, 10 years?
It's probably less than the last 5 years.
Okay.
Recently, it's more of a recent kind of a trend, and that has accelerated dramatically over the pandemic. Just cashless, a lot of economies very, very quickly ended up reducing their exposure to cash payments.
Mm-hmm.
And so, any person that does payments digitally in any market out there in the world is a potential client that someone could transact via with an alternative payment method today. This wasn't the case. So, a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
clients would, I mean, we have all kinds of diverse clients, from government agencies to public FX and CFD brokerage houses with large reputation to defend. So we've seen all kinds of uses, and I'll give you an example of a Filipinian of a government client who actually accepts funds from Filipino citizens. And what they would do is they would go to this one to an adjacent village, let's say, and
Hmm.
bring cash, and then only one person in the village would have a debit card.
I
So
see.
effectively, that cash is delivered to that person, and then that cash takes quote unquote an interchange fee, so that that sole person who has a debit card can then use it and pay for a certain transaction, even though
Hmm.
everyone has a smartphone and even though everyone can settle digitally. It's just the world has become such a diverse playing field that to me, knowing what I know now about emerging markets and financial transactions and payments over there, it seems to me illogical as to how we only have a few players on that front in the emerged or developed markets. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to actually ask if I'm understanding correctly, some of these local payment methods, they do differ from, let's say, country to country or region to region. If that's the case, could you maybe speak a little bit about Zotapay's technology and maybe payment gateway and how it helps vendors essentially, combine everything in one, if I could call it an ecosystem. You're the tech guy here, so you know this terminology better than me, but like sort of, in one ecosystem where a vendor can collect payments from different regions, and your system could possibly interconnect with all of these local payment solutions, right, in different regions, different countries, and it all flows into one, let's say, ecosystem for the vendor or the customer.
So, in amongst the listeners, I'm certain some folks have worked at larger treasury desks or the wider brokerage industry and are very
Hmm.
well aware of the just the financial operations challenge of dealing with multiple vendors, multiple currencies, settling from multiple destinations, assuming all this currency risk while the funds are being repatriated, etc., etc. It's a task that is so large that, in fact, some of the larger institutions have dozens, if not hundreds, of people in their payment teams. An
Hmm.
effective way to think about us, Zotapay, as a financial operations firm and a technology company is that we are effectively a payments team along with all the associated technologies in a box.
Hmm.
So we are able to operate all of these relationships, multiple relationships per jurisdiction. If you think what a vendor might need to do is if you want to address a certain market, let's say the Philippines, you need to connect to several providers because if one provider, for example, currently has a maintenance window or is experiencing an outage or whatever it might be, there are commercial challenges or commercial negotiation issues with them. You're kind of stuck with either spending marketing budget and not being able to acquire clients or effectively missing on conversions.
Hmm.
So the what we will do on behalf of our clients is effectively maintain all of these various relationships around the world. So currently, as of a few weeks ago, we're looking at over 1,200 different payment methods all around the world in over 60 markets.
Wow.
So it's a very diverse ecosystem with very different payment flows. I mean, the
Hmm.
payment flows are just so different between country and method that sometimes you would have in one merchant or one client would require us to just support these vast plethora of different payment flows. So we would have to ensure that not only do these payment flows manage to execute whatever they might be and provide a local and familiar experience to the paying client with their own payment method, which in turn raises conversions, raises trust, and the ability to do things that the card industry does not allow, like brand the actual checkout experience and cashier, quote unquote, cashier pages, to use some
Hmm.
credit card terminology,
Hmm.
right? So this is something that provides merchant with a way with which they are able to effectively flatten all of this complexity into a single API. So a typical merchant, regardless of whether it's an enterprise or a mid to small size client, they would integrate with our API or use one of our various plugins and SDKs
Mm-hmm.
and they will start processing transactions based on the jurisdictions they require, regardless of what currency the transaction occur in, how long it takes for them to process, or basically what the technological requirements might be. Now, in a lot of the emerging markets, if you, especially if we look at sort of the statistics of how the majority of our world population got online, we quickly see that for the vast majority of us on this planet, the first internet connected device was a mobile phone.
Mm-hmm.
And so this mobile first payment focus is something that we decided to double down early on.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you start really getting into the trenches there and conducting thousands of transactions per second, you end up seeing that the internet is not this big blob of just very stable connections like we're very much used to in Europe and in the US and Japan and so on and so forth, where an internet outage is something that is a very rare occurrence. I mean, in the US, there are less internet outages than power outages for most households, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very reliable network. But if I were to tell you in the same sort of context that 5 to 6% of the global internet is inaccessible in any given moment, then all of a sudden it creates sort of a chasm where the internet is not as reliable outside of sort of the developed world.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, uh, and that's something that we have to be constantly cognizant of. So a lot of our clients are, of course, don't have this awareness, and so we come in and are able to monitor these. A same city. We'll be monitoring, let's say, a certain city in Southeast Asia, and we monitor the same city, the same mobile and internet providers from different points in the city. So we can actually see what the outage rate and the real availability of the actual purchasing customer is. Because if the purchasing customer cannot reach the payment flow page or even the merchant themselves, then that's a lost conversion. If someone shows up wanting to pay and they're unable to, that is a lost conversion.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
so a lot of technology and a lot of our effort is focused to make sure that all of our flows are reliable on 2G networks. Forget about 5G networks. We're talking
Mm-hmm.
about 2G edge, bandwidth constrained, all devices, 6, 7, 8-year-old Android phones. So if you think about it, developing the software means that we have to go out there and test on hundreds of models of legacy phones and other devices that are no longer supported by either their maker or the maker is no longer around,
Mm-hmm.
or a combination of the above, basically. So we have to sometimes support very, very difficult combinations of software in order to widen the addressable market that effectively our clients are able to get.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And if we can speak a little bit about the needs of, let's say, the online trading industry, such as like Forex and CFD brokers and like related companies, from what you're seeing, can you tell us what changes such clients have had to their approach, to payments within the last few years? Kind of, in terms of what you've been seeing and hearing from your customers in terms of their wants and needs and how they've changed over the last, year or two.
So one of the if I could synthesize my interaction with our clients, it boils down to pretty much the same set of one or two sentences, and that is, we have a very strong brand. We are on on let's say the football shirt of European League, Premier League team A, B, or C, and their discounting of how much their brand strength really is, because if a European brokerage is advertising in European channels, especially in sports venues and so on, that ends up also being broadcast all around the world. And
Mm-hmm.
so inadvertently, this affects the cost of acquisition for a lot of companies. So a lot of our clients would come and say, "Well, I have a very, very strong brand, but how do I monetize it in Southeast Asia? How do I monetize it
Mm-hmm.
in Africa? How do I monetize it in South America, in
Mm-hmm.
the LATAM region?" And so that's exactly the questions that a lot of them have, and once they realize that the cost of acquisition is lower in these markets and the ability to address them technologically now is a lot more feasible with solutions like ours. It's just that we see a lot of growth of customers who end up going that way.
hmm And if we can speak just quickly about the LATAM market, I mean, my general impression, and again, this is in speaking with colleagues, at brokerages, and just looking at some of the overall global strategies that some retail forex brokers have had over the years. It seems LATAM is has become a very big focus, for retail forex brokers, and I guess that in terms of solutions from Zotapay and other providers, it's really a matter of what we have already discussed. It's having the technological capability to do it quickly and swiftly and accurately, to basically be able to acquire funds in these specific individual countries, because I'm sure that Brazil has different PSPs or local payment acquirers as compared to Argentina, as compared to Peru, and et cetera, et cetera. Am I understanding that correctly, or are there more
Yes,
nuances? More nuances to regions like LATAM?
there's a ton more nuances, and there's a ton more than I know of, and I'm sure there's many tons of ones that I don't know. After all, each and every one is a sovereign country with its own central bank and its own policies and own financial regulators, as a market participant, it is up to of course the payment institutions, but also each and every individual brokerage to look into these policies and make sure that they're compliant at any given moment with these processes. So yes, every market has its own specifics.
And
But at the end,
yeah.
and just sort of say this with a sentence, right? For brokerages and brands that have built very, very, very strong brands, world recognizable brands, for them to not monetize them is just a shame.
No, I completely agree. Of course, from a
The
business
complexity is worth
standpoint.
it at the end. Yes, go ahead.
No, yeah, and it seems like you just mentioned complexity. Um, when you look at this as a layperson or on the surface, it seems quite easy. You just connect to an API or you connect to a plugin, and you're set,
Yeah.
and you're ready to go. But just to think about the sheer, like you said, the sheer amount of different devices that people use, the fact that this is all interconnected with mobile phones, mobile technology, both wired and mobile internet, and different currencies around the world. It seems quite staggering to be able to for a global vendor to be able to manage all of this. And another question I had in terms of currencies, I don't know if this is something that you can comment on because you really are focused on the technology side. There's this idea that crypto winter, right? Crypto markets have taken a beating over the last 3, 4, 5 months. The price of crypto is significantly lower than what it was. I don't know if you have insights into currency flows, quote unquote, right, that go through your clients. But I'm wondering if crypto has the share of payments that are attributed to crypto versus fiat have had any impact, whether or not they've decreased since we've gone into this quote unquote crypto winter, or are they the same, or are people actually transacting in crypto even more now that, crypto has quote unquote become a little bit more affordable, right? If you've never invested in it or never bought cryptocurrency before, kind of, if you have a take on this or some information, some insights.
So I don't really get to see retail sort of on flow or on ramp of retail crypto demand. I kind of want to mention that we are also not very focused on the digital asset space in terms of the services we provide to merchants to accept payments in crypto. We do provide this service, but it's not a major area of our focus. We are, however, a user of one would say the institutional sort of side of crypto, which is stable coins, and effectively we use stable coins to compete against SWIFT and SEPA. So if with providers from all around the world, we're able to work, and of course directly with the stablecoin providers. So that's an institutional level relationships that we have. We're able to of course, because of compliance, regulatory issues, and other things, but we're able to work very closely with the stablecoin issuers, and that effectively gets to a point where today it is effectively cheaper to transact outside of the Swift and SEPA networks because of what crypto did in this last crypto cycle. We
Hmm.
call it the winter now, but I think the last crypto cycle created a lot more institutional sort of groundwork for
Hmm.
everyone.
Sure. Hmm.
And companies grew, and of course Circle and then other contentious players like Tether, and also of course Binance became such a dominant player in the market, and are professionalizing the entire game effectively.
Hmm.
But for us as an institution, I saw the largest sort of unlock was for institutional capital out of this cycle. I feel because that has allowed already for the digital asset ecosystem to more broadly change certain, or challenge even, I would say, certain norms in settlements, such as Swift and SEPA.
Hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
that part is here to stay. It's here to grow. There's a lot more that is going to be happening on that front for sure. There's a lot of vendors going on. There's a lot of very interesting compliance and law enforcement cooperation that is going on, because to us as an institution, unless we can work with law enforcement and compliance officers in various banks and other financial institutions, then we cannot use the asset.
Hmm.
But we see a lot more openness, and now as the tools are becoming better and we're able to trace transactions better, and I guess they're, I mean, if you look at some of the chain analysis reports and other stuff, they're tracking down the baddies, and law enforcement is able to do their thing. And the more of that is happening, the more trust there will be amongst institutional players.
Hmm.
And I think there's just a major field over there. So that's
Hmm.
one thing. The other thing is what it does for retail payments. For a large amount of and usually in the FX sort of CFD industry, the average transaction size is slightly larger. But in a lot of cases, for smaller transactions, especially on the Ethereum mainnet or even on BTC, just the transaction fees are fairly expensive.
Hmm.
And so until we see, any major L2 adoption or any, material change to the gas fees on Ethereum, it's unlikely that retail will go right. I mean, there's sort of an inverse effect of cost versus demand for block space.
Hmm.
So if one way I like to think of Ethereum is that Ethereum is in the business of selling block space,
Hmm.
so the cheaper block space becomes, the more transactions there will be on the block space. And so by I think that within the next 5 years, Ethereum has the potential to become a vastly scalable chain with all kinds of exciting things like side chains, permissioned chains, and other things, and that will drive even further institutional adoptions. But also, as the cost is going down, it will drive further the retail adoption as well.
Yeah, I actually absolutely agree with all the points that you made. I think, you did mention regulations and also interactions with necessary interactions and liaison with, regulatory authorities, law enforcement authorities. I think, from my perspective, I think the regulators around the world, again, they need to get in lockstep, I think, sort of with each other and individually, and finally decide. Like, for example, in the United States, right? Is it going to be a security or is it going to be a commodity, right? How are we going to
Yes.
classify these things? And until we can get past that hurdle, I think, or if we, when we can get past that hurdle, that's when we could really see the next wave of adoption of cryptocurrencies just in general, broadly, for all industries, right, for all retail industries around the world. But until then, it's kind of like a wait and see game. And I guess, I can understand from your company's perspective why you wouldn't necessarily want to be that focused on crypto at the moment when there's so much other potential out there globally in
Yeah, yeah. I
terms
mean,
of.
We
currencies.
haven't connected. Yeah, we haven't even connected all the humans together yet. So, you know,
Yeah, makes sense, of course. Yeah.
and one thing that the, APMs and just the universe we operate in as a company is allowing us to do is to actually create a bidirectional payment network. Right?
Hmm.
A lot of these alternative payment methods, as opposed to cards, are bidirectional. So we're both able to acquire but also send funds
Hmm.
to clients.
Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
in
Yep.
yeah, and it's fairly inexpensive and pretty much immediate. So that is this bidirectional nature allows our clients to build amazing features. I mean, you'll be amazed if you just provide a few good building blocks to a bunch of smart people what they're able to do.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so so building the right tools, of course, is paramount in our view.
Hmm. I wanted to get your take on chargebacks. This is a topic that's never ending in the brokerage space. Brokers, Forex CFD brokers have been dealing with this for years. I wanted to find out, how does Zotapay approach this issue, and kind of maybe what solutions you have for both vendors, acquirers, companies, and customers to resolve these kind of issues. And maybe possibly even transactions that could actually be genuinely fraudulent.
Yes, so because of the way most of the APMs and we have an internal grading system where we effectively audit each and every vendor and vet each and every payment firm that we partner with. That's really where our strength of our network, the strength of our network comes from.
Hmm.
So the chargebacks themselves are an issue of charge cards, right? So that's something that's been around with the industry for a long time, and is effectively either fraud or intentional or unintentional. People have been doing this just because the payment method allows them to.
Hmm.
If you think about Venmo or cash, right, there are no chargebacks. Once you process a transaction, it's pretty much final.
Yeah, it's gone, right? Hmm.
So it's in a way the big card networks price in the risk among all of their clients, right? So effectively, it's a risk transfer exercise of how do we take the risk of chargebacks and then figure out a way to kind of spread it across our entire client book.
Hmm.
And that's something to this day happens, of course, with credit cards and debit cards, and will continue to do so as long as the numbers on them, the printed numbers on them, are actually valuable. In APMs, I wouldn't say there are no chargebacks. We call them disputes. So our numbers of disputed transactions are much lower. I mean, fractions of a percent
Hmm.
of total transactions because transactions are immediate. So think of APM, alternative payment methods, the more secure ones, the ones that we call secure, effectively internally, are ones that actually have a second form of authentication built in.
Hmm.
So we would generate, let's say, a QR code or a deep link to an app or anything of the sort, regardless. I mean, depending on what the payment flow demands.
Hmm.
And then that person will have to log in into their own account, whether it's bank account, whether it's e-wallet, whatever it might be, and approve the transaction internally.
Hmm.
So what that causes is a real and undisputable approval on behalf of the user that they wanted that transaction to happen. And so that creates an ecosystem where just the fraud rate is much lower.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Of course.
So APMs inherently are have a less built-in risk just because of the fact that they already include second and sometimes even third factor authentication.
Hmm. And I think maybe even from if we talk about sort of fraudulent or illegitimate, let's say, actions on the part of customers, because that does happen too. I feel like with card payments, it's like they know that that's a thing that they can do after the fact, right? Once they've submitted a transaction at a
Yes.
merchant, that they can call and they could file a chargeback. Whereas with APMs, on the one hand, like you said, it's instant, right? So it's kind of like the money's out of your account and it's going to the merchant, and you don't necessarily have. Again, it's not something that's spelled out clearly or instructions provided. Oh, if if you made a payment in error, this is what you can do. So it seems like there from a customer standpoint, there's just not there's no, I'm not going to say it's an enticement, but there's no information there to suggest that you can go and say, oh, give me my money back because of some reason that I made up, for example.
So a lot of that behavior, and I want to say something more broadly, and it maybe by chance or maybe by the very clever design of a few companies out there
Hmm.
in the alternative payment market space. But at the end, if there is an incentive to cheat, people will, right? That's sort of
Sure.
quote Dan Ariely, who's a behavioral scientist.
Yeah.
If the card itself allows you to pretty much risk free or without much of a punishment to go out there and dispute a transaction, then you probably will, if you don't like the outcome of that transaction. And it happens in e-commerce and in, of course, outside of the financial industry. It's pretty much a thing in every sort of payment process that has cards involved.
Hmm. This episode is sponsored by Zotapay. The new challenge: payments in emerging markets. The ultimate solution: Zotapay. Visit zotapay.com and boost your business. And given everything that we've discussed today about the evolution of payments globally up until now, right? In your professional opinion, where do you think the future of global payments is going? Like, for example, do you think we're going to see more massive crypto adoption, and essentially we're going to move in that direction, or are alternative payment methods going to grow alongside crypto and alongside well, I don't think, maybe not alongside traditional card payments, but are ADMs going to grow in terms of technology and going to improve, let's say, speed, reliability, uptime? Like, what do you think is in store for the future for all of us?
So it's an interesting open-ended question, and I can only speculate, of course.
Of course, of course.
As Philip Tetlock, the Nobel laureate, wrote an interesting book called Super Forecasters, and in that book he sort of breaks down a long term experiment in forecasting the future.
Hmm.
And so the TLDR version of this is that of course no one is good at forecasting, especially myself. But I will say the following: it already is apparent that the penetration rate of cards and the card ecosystem, with all of its legacy sort of luggage and bags that it brings with itself, is having a difficult time ramp up in emerging markets. So I guess it is up to any major event to either to tip the scales or another way. And what I
Hmm.
mean by that is, something as effectively as simple as I mean, if you were to take Elon Musk and him buying Twitter as a serious fintech sort of challenger out there, and of course, maybe some people do think that it's a viable option, but at the end, a major industry event could cause the scales to tip further in favor or of one or the other.
Hmm.
But for now, by the looks of it, and by the sort of the industry, I guess, polls, we're seeing that APMs keep growing, even in the West. I mean, Cash and Venmo and I mean, if we use WhatsApp, right, to chat to each other and our loved ones,
Hmm.
but one thing that few people know is that there's WhatsApp Pay in India, and you can actually pay with WhatsApp in India. And even though we don't have it here in the West, it's something that WhatsApp actually operate in another market and have obtained, you know, the various regulatory requirements and compliance requirements that they needed in order to conduct this in India. And so I think that alternative payment methods are here to stay and here to grow.
Hmm.
I think that the Western consumer is a lot more used to this credit line in a plastic sort of view we have of cards. But in emerging markets, the credit instrument is separated from the card itself. So whether it's a card or an e-wallet, it's still you still have a credit instrument and a credit line attached to it.
Hmm.
And lending and micro lending and mortgages and insurance and all kinds of other nice things. I think that the vertical providers in that space or companies who are able to create this B2C value for retail clients to exist in their ecosystems have a real chance of challenging existing banking
Hmm.
and of course the existing card industry.
Hmm.
In usually a lot of things happen very quickly whenever there is a ripe sort of technological conditions for it.
Hmm.
I'll give a quick example of because you're a New Yorker. I'm sure you're aware of the New York City medallions for taxis
Yes, yes.
and for taxi cabs and the prices that they ended up commanding at some point. And then when Uber came, which effectively was the precipice of a mobile phone that has a sufficient, just enough of an experience for you to be able to utilize it as a thing that you can order a cab with,
Hmm.
and at the same time mobile payments, and at the same time internet connected. Right. So
Hmm.
the fact
Yep.
that this device is internet connected, you can actually get your own cab and manage that dynamic itself disrupted the existing market and almost to the point of it breaking. So
Yes.
I think that there are sort of subterranean movements of tectonic plates, and the folks from Venmo and Cash App and others are sort of making a lot of this happen. So it is a matter of when us, I guess, in the West will be more receptive to such payment technologies, because in emerging markets it's already a reality.
Yeah, Alex, I think you bring up very, very important points. Even for me personally, for example, when Apple Pay came about, and I think Google has its own version of this technology now as well. I'm somebody who used to carry around a business card. I'm sorry, a debit card or a credit card at all times. And once I realized that I don't need to do that, I could just basically use my phone to transact everywhere, physically where I go and need to transact. It's kind of like it's been sort of like a pleasant, eye-opening experience for me, and I think that has been the same for many, many other people here in the States and in other Western countries. They now see that things are becoming digitalized, and there's no more need to carry the debit card with you at all times. It could stay in your wallet or in your pocketbook somewhere else, and you don't necessarily need to carry it around with you.
Yes, I'm willing to actually put my money effectively where my mouth is and say the following. I will bet you a breakfast or brunch at Jack's wife Frida on the fact that if you go through your pockets, you will not find an older technology than this magnetic stripe on your card.
Hmm. Hmm. Most likely, yes, of course, most likely. It's been around since what, the 60s?
50s, yeah, 50s,
50s?
60s. I mean, initially it was just embossed numbers, but they added the stripe at some point, the magnetic stripe on there. So yes, I mean, yeah, it's fairly outdated, and consumers are just adopting to this new method of payments. And I think one of the more critical sort of aspects to this is the major ongoing battles around these payments, of whether it's Apple, Google, or Samsung, and the sort of app store ecosystem payments, right? So Epic famously challenged Apple, and as far as I'm aware, this lawsuit is still going. But
Hmm.
it will not be long before many major U.S. Merchants and content creators and other media companies, gaming companies, etc., figure out that there's another 6 billion out there that are not being addressed because by the virtue of not having a card, they are not able to actually monetize their app store presence.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that will be a big aha moment where um, um, a lot of folks in Europe and in the US create amazing experiences, games, and online content, and there's a lot of demand for it in many English speaking countries and that are from emerging markets, and of course English speaking and quickly enriching middle class that is in many of sort of the miracle stories of many emerging markets, and the fact that they're not able to be monetized easily is something that I think is yet to become a major point of sort of a driving force. Because even though a lot of us initially consider Visa and Master and the big cards as a global payment instrument, it has never been less true than it is today.
Yeah, I could see where I could see what you mean. Yeah, 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 yeah. And the other thing you mentioned about vertical companies here in the United States, companies like SoFi and others, are now offering a completely digital experience. Right? It's a bank. There's no branch. You just simply do everything from your phone or from your online account. You can have a checking account, a mortgage account. You can have a savings account, and you can you could essentially do all of your traditional, what we know as traditional banking transactions, directly from your phone without having to physically interact with a person or go to a branch. And this actually kind of raises an idea in my head. We spoke about blockchain and Ethereum, right, for example, and possible advances in the blockchain space. If there comes a time when we all could use a universal blockchain to transact with each other. Companies like SoFi can be connected to the Chase mobile app, to the Capital One app, to alternative payment methods, to everything, and everybody can just basically transact across blockchains, right? I mean, hopefully, maybe that's something to look forward to in the not in the near future, but possibly in the distant future at some point, once we get over regulatory hurdles and all kinds of other adoption questions.
Yeah, yes, I just want to remind the audience that is still listening to this, the following: that initially in the early days of the internet, computers by different makers couldn't talk to each other.
Sure, right.
Today, this is if I had to explain this to my children today and telling them, listen, there used to be a time where one will talk X25, the other one will talk TCP/IP, and will not be able to, and they'll be like, what are these two, and are you guys slow? Why? Who designed two different protocols that are not operating with interoperable with each other?
Hmm.
So a lot of that happens as technology sort of adoption happens. We have a lot of these examples, the Betamax VHS and HD DVD and Blu-ray
Hmm.
and so on and so forth. And these technology adoption curves happen slowly at first, but all of a sudden at some point. And so it just so happens that it is fairly possible that a company, one of our companies, might figure out a way to address the retail demand for payments over the
Hmm.
blockchain. I
Hmm.
think it will take at least another crypto cycle for that to happen. So at least the cost of block space can go down
Hmm.
significantly
Hmm.
from its today's levels and its scalability. Right, because
Hmm.
if
Yep.
you reduce the cost of gas by 90%, let's say on Ethereum, that you will see, for every percent that you reduce gas, there will be a percentage increase in demand for block space. So if
Hmm.
you make transactions very, very cheap, there will be such a vast amount of them that you end up hitting other scalability issues at the end.
Hmm.
But as I'm saying, maybe in 5 years, just all of the technological infrastructure in place will be a lot more ready to deal with these things, and then it's certainly worth sort of watching as this is developing.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, let's look forward to what happens. Maybe we can. Hopefully, we can do a few more podcast episodes down the road as things progress. And
I would love to, yes, and just what digital assets and the smart contract as a concept is able to do is it's just getting excited.
mhm,
Think
yeah.
of sort of digital asset space. One way I'd like to think of it, at least, is sort of the internet in the mid '90s, late '90s. That's what really. I mean, everyone knows it's cool, but NFTs kind of.
Sure, sure, sure.
it's like in the 90s. Oh, so you can order a book or watch a real video, like a Spice Girls video.
Hmm.
That's very cool. And fast forward 20 years and look at us now.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
We consider
yeah.
this a human right.
Absolutely right. Yeah, exactly. Look at how much we've evolved. Yep.
Uh,
Alex, I wanted to actually take a step back and find out more about you as a person, specifically Alex, the father, the hacker, and the demi chef. That's basically what's listed on your LinkedIn profile. I see that you have a pretty diverse background. You've lived in Israel, I think Bulgaria. Now you're in the United States. You attended Harvard Business School. I guess if you could talk a little bit about your upbringing, and I really want to find out kind of at what point in your early years, or at school perhaps, when did you realize that technology and IT were your passion, and how did that translate sort of into your career, at companies like Radware and Tradio, and now at Zotapay?
so it's an interesting question, and so let me try to go through this in a way in which make it interesting to most people. I was born in a place called Sofia, Bulgaria. This is in the east of Europe. It's a country that has a border with Greece,
Mm-hmm.
and I like calling it the Vermont of Europe. It's a very lush mountainous area,
Uh-huh.
and beautiful mountains, beautiful lakes, amazing scenery all around. In the late 90s, I moved to Israel and immigrated. We moved to a kibbutz with my father, and actually moved between a few kibbutzim. It was an amazing time, and that's where really I sort of developed my passion for technology, on the kibbutz ISDN connection at the time, which was
Mm-hmm.
internet connected. So I was able to effectively, as an immigrant from literally the bottom of the income scale, was able to
Yeah.
get access to information that was extremely enriching, and was able to propel my career effectively for free, just because I was in a school and in an environment that allowed me to more sort of creatively explore my gifts and just break things in sort of a controlled, benign fashion,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. And after my graduation from school, I got drafted into the IDF, and I served in various roles after that, and was part of the wider Israeli defense industrial complex for a number of years also.
Mm, interesting.
Effectively, my career started my professional career started at Radware. I was developing embedded software and effectively hardware, building hardware and ASICs and chips. And I had the privilege of starting my technology career as a person who has to figure out how to program these FPGA chips that do these operations, network operations at very, very high paces.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a very, very interesting challenge. I was one of the first employees of the division of the company. The company listed on Nasdaq. All of us made a few shekels in the process. It was a very, very interesting time
Nice.
in the mid 2000s. That's roughly the time where I moved into the US and lived for a number of years in New York and New Jersey, flying around. And then I worked, continued my work there for a number of years. I founded a few startups, and this kind of ended up taking me all around the world. I've lived on the Caribbean, in the Caribbean basin for a number of years. If you combine all the time that I spent over there for 3, 6 months, and so on and so forth. I lived in the
Uh-huh.
Far East for a little bit. Also, so I've been all around. I've been to over 90 countries, and emerging markets was an absolute. It was such a fit for me to join Zota in the capacity that I do, because I have a lot of interest and love for macroeconomics and emerging markets and emerging market security and other things, and being able to combine cybersecurity, finance, and sort of global emerging markets exposure was to me sort of my dream job,
Mm-hmm.
if I could sort of state it that. I also love cooking, as you correctly pointed out.
Yes.
Effectively a demi chef, I like to play with cuisine, and some of my favorite sort of experiences eating things would be on a sidewalk in Hanoi, where cars are flying at 100 miles next to 5 inches from your head, and at the same time you're eating some of the most amazing soups with the freshest of vegetables from some grandma who's been on the street corner for 50 years making the same soup.
Hmm.
And it's just such an incredible experience, right? These or hopping between Greek islands on just a little tiny raggedy boat to go visit small restaurants, family-owned restaurants that have been around for a number of years, decades even.
Hmm.
So that's really the kind of cuisine that entices me is more of this home cooking of different cultures out there, and that's what
Hmm.
really I try to replicate in my kitchen. Not so much the Michelin, molecular
Sure, sure.
side of things, but I like to just get the precision of sort of our ancestors and the way they used to cook
Hmm.
way back when.
How long does
So
it? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
that's really what my sort of cooking desires are. Go ahead.
I was gonna ask, how long does it take you to, like, let's say, perfect a new recipe? Like, let's say you found something new that you want to try to cook at home, right? From, let's say, your experiences abroad. How does that process work? Like, how long does it take you to make something, and say this is probably the way I want it, and then share that recipe with, or share the food with your family or friends, and kind of get their opinion. I'm sure, right? What do you think? Do you like it, etc. Like.
So I mean, some recipes, even though they're simple, could take multiple lifetimes to master, and I think the process is the sweet sort of part of this, and not the and not saying, okay, I now have mastered cooking pho, let's say.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Vietnamese cuisine is very interesting, in particular in this entire region, because of their just heavy use of vegetables that are very strong in color, and of course the biodiversity of vegetables and fruit and other things. So I can say with a fair degree of confidence that I am still not able to, make killer pho, even
Okay.
after all these years of trying,
Hmm.
and that's because, usually you have to start 12 to, I guess 16 hours
Mm.
before you serve with creating the broth and the stock and crushing the bones and the entire process. So this is it's something that I hope to keep doing and keep repeating, and practice makes perfect over there. So
Hmm.
some even things that are considered very very simple to cook are actually a lot more complicated than they initially appear.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Listen, I also noticed that in your public profile, you sit on the board of a company called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Xi'an. It's
Indeed.
located in Vienna, Austria, and it says that the company specializes in sound acoustics. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So as a just a sound geek, audio geek, and of course a car geek, I've always played with acoustical components, and whether in just to get a better sound out of a few speakers that I have lying around, or just trying to understand signal processing in just space better, so I can tune the acoustics of something, and just side projects on the weekend basically.
Hmm.
And so the this came out as an interesting opportunity from the founders who I've met a number of occasions before. They are making a product. So Xion is effectively an audio acoustics company. They're making a product that provides an acoustic bubble in a room where it's being installed. So think of a panel or a specialized piece of hardware that you deploy on a wall or on a stand, and it's able to
Hmm.
actively participate in the acoustics of the space around you. So if it detects echo, you'll try to
Hmm.
cancel it. If you would like it to create a privacy screen so that it actually cancels out the audio around where your head is, it's able to do that based
Wow.
on all kinds of clever technology.
Hmm.
And so it combines a few things that I enjoy a lot. Of course, audio and lots of software and digital sound processing, but also material. So it uses some very sophisticated materials to actually achieve that effect. And it's a very very interesting company. It's close to my heart, and just because I enjoy audio technology so much.
Hmm. And I think you mentioned that you, well, I think you have a passion for like fighting cybercrime and even like, I think maybe extremism. I wanted to find out, is that something that kind of coincides with your work, or is it something that you do on a volunteer basis? Perhaps you give lectures, conferences, I don't know, kind of share information about uh, how to effectively fight cybercrime, because cybercrime is a huge issue. It's becoming more and more of an issue, it seems, every single year, both in cryptocurrency markets, both in just traditional markets um, with people being scammed. It's a huge problem still for industries like forex and things like that. Kind of wanted to find out a little bit more about that side of Alex.
So in cybercrime is effectively our position as a financial and speaking about Zota here, our position as a financial institution allows us to be on the precipice of where effectively cybercrime will have to put money into fiat, and that both us and the entire industry, puts all of us in a position where we have to be extremely diligent with these fund flows, and how what they do, and of course be cooperative with the various regulators and law enforcement agencies around the world.
Hmm.
Having dealt with law enforcement in the past in all kinds of capacities, I can tell you that they're of course, just because, as you correctly pointed out, the uptake of just events has caused them to be swamped with just tons and tons and tons of cases from
Hmm.
so many different places and locations, and various degrees of national security implications with it, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
But uh, as a financial institution, and I think I'd like to think that I speak for the entire industry here, in saying that we all of us, our collective diligence is what law enforcement depends on in order to stop illicit flows of funds. And it is very very difficult to achieve because, of course, these crime syndicates are extremely sophisticated, and they've managed to do this for many years, and no doubt will continue to do so in the future. And of course, the crypto sort of digital asset ecosystem has allowed criminals a whole new layer of means of transferring vast amounts of value in a pretty much untraced fashion. So effectively, where crypto crosses fiat into the real world, or any digital fund flows cross into the real world, is
Hmm.
where we have to be extra diligent, and that's where I personally focus the majority of my sort of hunting for baddies efforts. On more of a strategic long term planning perspective, I'd like to see more industry bodies being created, and around this collaboration, especially around digital asset ecosystem participants. I'd like to
Hmm.
see a way in which the Interpol and certainly the FBI, but also other law enforcement agencies from all around the world, are able to better cooperate with the big digital asset venues,
Hmm.
such as the Binances of the world, and Coinbases, and so on and so forth. And today, it might not be the case in its entirety. So the tighter cooperation will actually result in a safer environment for us all. And of course, I spend my time teaching at an emerging market university. So for the last semester, and now this following 2 semesters, I'll be teaching a course on cyber defense strategy, mainly
Hmm.
to law enforcement and government officials in Sofia, Bulgaria. So it's the NATO Crisis Management Center is located there. So I get very very interesting folks who come to my lectures over there,
Hmm.
who are effectively on the front lines of various cyber and digital conflicts around the world. So we have
Hmm.
an amount of just I guess bilateral experience sharing
Hmm.
within the realm of non secrecy, non sensitive matters to national security is amazing. That charges me, and I hope that I also am able to reciprocate the value that I extract from my teachings over there to the folks who actually I expect one day to be working with when chasing threat actors
Hmm.
around
Hmm.
the internet.
That's very
So I
cool.
think that yeah. One of my I guess biggest achievements that I feel for myself is the ability to do knowledge transfer and teach and pass on the knowledge and effectively the the hard work that myself and my colleagues have been doing tirelessly day and night into law enforcement professionals, so they can effectively start from there and move forward. And I think this is more topical with how the war in Ukraine sort of came about this year, and now a lot of smaller European democracies are starting to realize that it's just protection is very difficult, and
Yes,
especially
yes.
the talent pool. It's very difficult for them to compete with the demand of digital technology companies, and their talent pool is dwindling. And of course, that leaves them more vulnerable to various threat actors. And so I hope that my actions are able to educate at least a few good folks and provide them with the tools and capabilities to thwart these nation state cyber operations that have pretty much become a reality of today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Well, that's very cool that you're sort of giving back to the community in a sense because you have firsthand knowledge of what's going on in terms of the actual, transactions, obviously on a macro scale, and to be able to transfer that knowledge to the parties that need it the most these days, to for them to figure out how to plan ahead and how to catch bad actors is definitely something really, really cool, noble, and noteworthy. Alex, we're almost out of time. My last question. I believe you're currently living in Miami, Florida, if I'm if I'm correct. But
Indeed, I am.
but you've lived all over the world, as you've said. Is Miami sort of like a temporary hub for you and your family, or is it somewhere where you think you've settled down for, you know, for the long term? And if it's for the long term, why? Is it the weather? Is it access to the ocean, good schools, or is it work related? And you have colleagues, staff, or something there that you work with.
So the first the first main reason perhaps we moved to Miami is the fact that my wife grew up here,
Okay.
we currently live in Boca. This is slightly north of the Miami proper, the Miami city. Yeah, great schools, of course. It's something that our kids just started attending school, so it's something that we just had to figure out. But I think the one of the major drivers is the just the digital asset ecosystem that is kind of being created here in Miami. So that's part of the reason why the sort of our move here aligned with the wider company goals of becoming a more prevalent digital asset ecosystem participant from the point of view of institutional sort of digital asset use. And we're creating an office here. We're expanding here in the U.S. From sort of an R&D and technology expertise perspective. We'd like to focus on that and build great tools for clients, whether on and off chain or on or off chain, for them to be able to really provide more value to the entire ecosystem and their clients as well.
This episode is sponsored by Zotapay. Zotapay gives the power to your business to reach billions of customers, fast and simply. One application, one integration. Visit zotapay.com and boost your business. This is something that I've asked my previous guests who also live in your area. How do you find the talent pool locally? Is there enough candidates to sort of fill the needs that you have? Or is it something where you're possibly recruiting from different regions and people are just willing to relocate to Florida? Because I mean, let's if you think about it, ocean, Miami, nice beaches. I mean,
Exactly, palm
it's the
trees.
lifestyle, the lifestyle. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
But how's the talent pool? Because different guests on the podcast have told me different things over the
So
last few months.
it really depends. I coming from cybersecurity, I optimize for different kind of talent, and maybe this is a broader conversation than you sort of expected
Hmm.
for this. But in the cybersecurity and this level of sophisticated, on-chain and of course off-chain application technology and so on and so forth, a lot of the folks or especially in the cybersecurity industry, in the sort of the top, let's say 5 percentile of skill set, are folks who come from troubled families and all kinds of various national security agencies, including here in the U.S. The NSA have publicly stated that they had to, I guess, change their recruiting standards for folks in the cyber, especially
Hmm.
on the offensive front. And this might be changing now, but from a recruiting perspective, to sort of hone in on your question, I like working with weird people who bring interesting perspectives to the table.
Uh-huh.
Right. One of my most senior engineers today, he's a geologist.
Oh,
He was
wow.
not
Interesting.
formally trained to be a computer scientist
Uh-huh.
or a software engineer.
Uh-huh.
He's a geologist, but the level of commitment he has to any field that he goes into has caused. I mean, he's created a great developer with very deep understanding and very considerate thought process on software and on software architecture. So I'd like to think that's any person who connects on sort of the wheel of science. If you put any subject of science on a circle, whoever connects the sort of the farthest branches of science ends up being a very very valuable person in this modern digital economy that we have. And so, to kind of go back to answering your question, I tend to optimize for hiring, especially for R&D and sort of future project work.
Hmm.
I tend to optimize for talent who's might be overlooked
Others,
by
yep.
just
Hmm.
the traditional sort of corporate and enterprise entities, and that's
Hmm.
because partially because me as a kibbutznik, I was never a corporate thinking person.
I understand,
Uh,
yep.
so, so coming from a kibbutz, that's the some of the first people who believed in me professionally ended up being exactly these kinds of people who optimized for something else. So that's what I kind of like to do, and let people's performance speak for themselves, and not necessarily when they went to school or where they
Sure.
worked before.
Hmm. Great. That's awesome. Well, Alex, listen, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. Very, very insightful discussion. I hope you had fun. We sure did. And we wish you best of luck at Money 2020 later this week. And hopefully we can see each other at an industry event or two sometime in the future, or do another one of these podcasts.
Thank you so much, Nikolai. It's been amazing talking to you, and I wish you also best of luck in further episodes. And I'll be seeing you around.
Thanks, Alex. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our latest Finance Feeds podcast episode. For sponsorship opportunities or to become a guest, please email us at info@financefeeds.com.